African poetry. This morning we want to look at Negritude in African poetry, and we're looking at Negritude as an aspect of the pioneering phase of African poetry. We're looking at Negritude as the pioneering phase of African poetry. Negritude is spelled Negritude. Negritude. Negritude is spelled Negritude. So we'll begin by looking at what negritude means, and then we will read 2 poems to illustrate the idea of negritude. So one thing you need to note about the colonial project is that it had different methods. There were different methods to the colonial project. And the colonial masters applied these methods differently depending on who they are, where they came from, or where they settled, or where they choose to colonize, or the circumstances of the colony. For instance, in Anglophone Africa, that means in parts of Africa colonized by the British, in Anglophone Africa, or in parts of Africa colonized by the British, especially West Africa, the type of method used in the colonial project or by the colonial masters was indirect rule. The colonial masters came in, chose representatives among the people, and ruled through them. That's indirect rule. Sometimes in kingdoms that were monarchical, they simply used the kings already in place. If they went to places that didn't have kings, they chose representatives by themselves. Okay? Like the warren chiefs. But the case was different in Francophone Africa, which is the part of Africa colonized by the French. Francophone Africa experienced another method of colonization known as assimilation policy. Assimilation policy. They use the assimilation policy. I suppose you come across assimilation policy. You heard of assimilation policy before. Okay? The assimilation policy intended to transform Africans into Frenchmen or into French. Assimilation policy had the objective of transforming into Frenchmen by assimilating them into the French culture. So the idea was to turn Africans into Europeans, particularly French people. Through acculturation. This means that they offered the Africans the opportunity to have the same rights and privileges as the French people in exchange for the Africans abandoning their culture and cultural values to embrace the culture and the cultural values of France. So, you could see how that is more deeply enduring than what the British did. But you see, the promises of the assimilation policy were not followed through because it failed at the point of practice. It failed at a point during practice. Yes, the Africans abandoned their culture and embraced the European French culture. But they were not wholly accepted as French people. Rather, were accepted as inferior French people. That was why it failed. That's why the assimilation policy failed at the point of practice. So there was a kind of deceit somewhere. The Africans were like being told, you could be French, but not as French as we are. So you be an inferior French person. That will be the high-class French people. Okay? That's where the assimilation policy failed. But in terms of Africans speaking French, imbibing French cultural values, they did. Okay? And it still affects them till today. Which is what brought about the statement that whenever France sneezes, French West Africa catches cold. Whenever France sneezes, French West Africa catches cold. Of course, the parody of an original statement. The parody of an original statement about the influence of Germany in Europe. But it speaks to the influence that France has and continues to have on its erstwhile colonies. Some which are trying to break away today, like Burkina Faso, but others are still being held hostage, politically, culturally, and otherwise. So whenever France sneezes, French West Africa catches cold. Now, what you need to understand about negritude is that it is an ideology formalized to counteract the effects of the assimilation policy on Africans. Negritude was an ideology formalized to counteract the effects of the assimilation policy on Africans. So take note of that. So Negritude is a black philosophy, a black conscious philosophy. That aim to make Africans conscious of their cultural values, and to make Africans conscious of their cultural values, and to find pride in their cultural values. This came at a point when the colonial ideology had ravished the African mindset, especially those in Francophone Africa. And so Negritude is like telling us, it's an ideology that admonishes Africans to return to their cultural roots. Africans should return to that cultural roots. Africans should value that culture. Should find pride in that culture. And it is rooted in the slogan, "Black is beautiful." Negritude is rooted in the slogan that black is beautiful. At a point when Africans thought that their skin pigmentation was something to be ashamed of. Anything black should be associated with evil. Anything black should be associated with darkness and inferiority. They came up with the slogan, "Black is beautiful." Black is the color of life. Which is not just a mere slogan, but a fact. Because you are best suited to survive, especially in the tropics, when you have the melanin that is found in the color black. And of course, the original peoples of the earth were black people. The original peoples of the earth were black people. The cradle of civilization, the people who formed the cradle of civilization were black people. And this is also saying that the original Egyptians were black, not the ones that you see today, who came from the desert. Those are not the original Egyptians. The original pharaohs, cradle of civilization, were black people. So it is nothing but a distortion of history and historical facts that made the Europeans to perpetrate themselves as civilized people. Whereas whatever they learn from Africa. Because Africans had universities before them. Africa had universities before the Europeans. By the time Africans had universities, Europeans were living in caves. So what destroyed Africa was what I might call unlimited, uncensored, unrestrained generosity. Which led to the destruction of Africa by the envious outsiders, envious Europeans. And then after they rewrote the history of Africa and made Africans look like slaves, primitive people and barbaric people. And they denied that they saw civilization when they came to Africa. Instead, they said that when they came, Africans were nothing. That's a lie. Most of them came to Benin and bowed to our Obas. Because they came there and saw a civilized city, well built, well secured. They came to Benin and bowed to our rulers. Then they turned around to sack the place and then to write that Africans were uncivilized. Okay, so to say that Africa or black is beautiful or Africa is the cradle of civilization is not just a mere statement to motivate, but rather a statement of fact. And Negritude found ways to revive pride in blackness among Africans. To tell Africans there's nothing to be ashamed about who you are, your thick lips, your thick nose, all right? They're all beautiful things. Your black skin is beautiful, okay? So Negritude is, first of all, cultural. And it seeks a cultural emancipation of African people by making them have faith and pride in blackness. Negritude also has a political dimension, but basically it's culturally motivated. It seeks to liberate Africans from their cultural bondage by the Europeans. Some of the important characters usually are implicated when discussing Negritude are Senghor, Leopold Senghor, are two important characters implicated when discussing Negritude. So, two important figures usually are credited with the ideology negritude are Senghor and Leopold said that Senghor. Senghor once made a statement that's indicative of the objective of negritude, and I would like you to listen to the statement. To set our own an effective revolution, we had first to put off our borrowed dresses, those of assimilation, and affirm our being, that is, our negritude. To be truly ourselves, we ought to embody the Negro African culture in the realities of the 20th century. I'll take that again. To set our own an effective revolution, we had first to put off our borrowed dresses, those of assimilation, and affirm our being, that is, our negritude. To be truly ourselves, we ought to embody the Negro African culture in the realities of the 20th century. So what does it mean by borrowed dresses? What does it mean by borrowed dresses? Borrowed dresses is a metaphor for the European culture. In that statement, you need to be able to interpret excerpts. Okay, so in that expression, we can see borrowed dresses as a metaphor for what? For European culture. European culture is not our culture, so that's why it's borrowed dresses. Okay? And that's why it says those of assimilation. So the assimilation policy is what negritude was meant to kick against. So negritude is concerned primarily with the cultural and political liberation of Africa from the whole of the colonial masters. Negritude is the sum total of the values of the civilization of the African world. Negritude is the sum total of the values of the civilization of the African world. This is according to Leopold Senghor. Another important figure that we know when we are talking about negritude is Leon Damans. Another important figure that we know when talking about negritude is Leon Damans. So negritude reflected in the ways these authors wrote their poems, including Birago Diop, Bernard Dadier, Leopold Senghor, and so on and so forth. In their work, they took pride in blackness. In their works, they took pride in blackness. And by that, it is meant that they consciously depict African culture as a way of countering the effects of European culture in Africa, or on the mindset of Africans. And so whenever we talk about negritude, you need to understand it within that dimension. And when we talk about negritude literature or negritude poetry, we're talking about poetry that celebrates blackness and African culture, especially by the Francophone writers, African writers, right? So negritude does not necessarily apply to Anglophone African writers, except by metaphoric extension, where you look at poems in Anglophone Africa that celebrates African culture as having the qualities of negritude poetry. Apart from that, it was basically practiced by the Francophone African writers. Like we've mentioned here, Birago, Diop, there's them again. Diop. And Leopold, Senghor, among others. So, to exemplify negritude, we are going to read two poems. One is Black Woman by Leopold Senghor. One is Black Woman by Leopold Senghor. And the second is Viaticum by Birago Diop. Please, you should take note of the list of poems that we've treated on the course, because at the point I need to bring them all together in one collection for everyone. Okay? So that at least it's important for you to have the text of the poem. Otherwise, you just get these two books, these two precious books. Because you could say that I've always drawn my poems on them. You know, one is African Poetry, New Edition. It is by Senghor and St. Vincent. And the other is West African Boers by Ngoga. So either you get the two, or you note down the points we've treated so far, so that at the point we will now put all of them together and give to you on a gold platter. All right? So Viaticum. So maybe I'll start with Senghor's Black Woman, right? Should be somewhere here. Black Woman. I'm going to read Black Woman by Leopold Senghor. And so, happy listening. Naked woman, black woman, clothed with your color, which is life, with your form, which is beauty, right? Black is beautiful. In your shadow, I have grown up. The gentleness of your hands was laid over my eyes. And now, high up on the sun-baked pass, at the heart of summer, at the heart of noon, I come upon you my promised land. The heart like the flash of an eagle. Naked woman, dark woman, firm flesh ripe fruits, somber raptures of black wine, mouth making lyrical my mouth, savannah stretching to clear horizons, savannah shuddering beneath the east wind's eager caresses, carved tam-tam, tart tam-tam, nurturing under the conqueror's fingers, the solemn contralto voice is a spiritual song of the beloved. Naked woman, dark woman, oil that no breath raffles, palm oil on the athlete's flank, on the flanks of the princess of Mali, gazelle limbed in paradise, pearls are stars in the night of your skin, the light of the mind, the glinting of red gold against your water skin. Under the shadow of your head, my gaze lightened by the neighboring suns of your eyes. Naked woman, black woman, I sing your beauty that passes, the form that I fix in the eternal, before jealous spade turn you to ashes, to feed the roots of life. So that is the poem, Black Woman, by Leopold Senghor. So, Leopold Senghor lived between 1906 and 2001. Leopold Senghor lived between 1906 and 2001. That means he lived in the 20th century and just 1 or 2 years in the 21st century. So you can class him as a 20th century writer, which reflects in the statement that we read from him earlier in the class. All right? To be truly ourselves, we ought to embody the Negro African culture, the realities of the 20th century, which is the era he lived and wrote in. Okay? He was a Senegalese poet. He was a Senegalese poet from Senegal. He was a politician. And was also a cultural theorist, as seen in Negritude. He was the president of Senegal between 1960 and 1980. He studied in Paris, specifically the University of Paris. Black Woman is one of his poems that we want to discuss this morning as embodying the ideologies or the ideals of Negritude. Okay? Of course, Negritude has been criticized, especially by Anglophone African writers like Wole Soyinka, who once said that the tiger does not shout, it's Tigritude. Meaning that if you are black and beautiful and powerful, there's no need to make noise about it, just show it. So a tiger does not shout the tigritude, it pounces. So action is more important than words. That's what Senghor was trying to say in his critique of Negritude. Tiger does not shout, it's tigritude. It pounces. But despite all of that, Negritude remains a force. The tiger does not shout, it's tigritude. So let us read the poem and analyze it. This poem has 4 stanzas. It is written in 3 verse, and it has it's written in run-on lines. Remember your introduction to poetry, where you were taught element of poetry. So you need to know these things. It's written in 3 verse and makes use of run-on line. Another word for run-on line is enjambment. Okay? The first stanza says, naked woman, black woman, clothed with your color, which is life, with your form, which is beauty. In your shadow I have grown up. The gentleness of your hand was laid over my eyes. And now, high up on the sun-baked paths, at the heart of summer, at the heart of noon, I come upon you, my promised land. And your beauty strikes me to the heart like the flash of an eagle. So, the first stanza has 10 lines. The title, Black Woman, is meant to celebrate the African woman and blackness at the same time. That is why the word black is very important in the poem. Black also is the African color. So the poem does not only aim to celebrate African woman, also aims to celebrate black culture and all that black culture stands for. Indeed, when you read the poem, you will notice that the woman in the poem is personified in such a way that it becomes a metaphor for Africa. So we are not just talking about a woman, we are talking about the woman as Africa. That's how you're supposed to understand the poem. The poem goes beyond talking about a woman, we talk about the African cultural space. Okay? So naked woman, black woman, speaks to the unpretentious culture or lifestyle of Africans, which is not artificial like the European culture. African culture is real. So the expression naked there talks about truthfulness, genuineness, okay, originality of the African woman and indeed the African culture, African cultural space. That's how you're supposed to understand that. So the persona is addressing not only the African woman, which represents African beauty, he's also addressing Africa as a whole, as a cultural entity. Clothed with your color, which is life, and the color is black. And we say that the color, African color, the black color is the color of life because of the melanin that it contains, and which is a survival kit for those who live in the tropics, because the sun that creates melanin when it touches the skin, and it has to be the black skin, and melanin is needed for individual survival. That's why it's the color of life. With your form, which is beauty, remember that the rallying cry of Negritude is that black is beautiful. So the African woman exemplifies beauty. original existential beauty. Okay? Not artificial beauty of the European woman. And that speaks to the beauty of Africa, the wealth of Africa, the riches of Africa. Whether in material terms or in cultural terms. Africa is beautiful. Africa is a beautiful place. In your shadow I have grown up. This persona, the persona, that means the voice speaking in the poem, was raised in Africa. Was raised in Africa by a kind, beautiful African mother, or was raised with African cultural values. Role that Africa plays in raising the child, the African child, meant that the persona was raised and nurtured in African culture. And now, high up on the sun-baked pass at the heart of summer, the persona is not in Africa at the moment of writing. The persona is right now in a foreign land, perhaps Europe, and he's recalling the beauty of Africa, the memories of his mother, and the beauty of the culture. We know this by the word summer, because summer is not an African weather. Summer is, is a European weather. So the persona is not at home. Maybe education has taken the persona outside home, and in foreign land, he remembers Africa. And your beauty strikes me to the heart like the flash of an eagle. In that expression, we have both an hyperbole and simile. Okay? Your beauty strikes me to the heart like the flash of an eagle. It speaks to the sheer force and power of African culture. It speaks to the sheer force and power of African culture. Stanzas 2 reads, naked woman, dark woman, firm-fleshed ripe fruits, somber ruptures of black one, mouth making lyrical my mouth. What we see in those lines is the use of metaphor to describe the beauty and worth of the African woman, and by extension, African culture. Notice the alliteration in the line, firm-fleshed ripe fruits, seen in the repetition of the initial consonant sound in firm, flesh, and fruits. It's alliteration. But the entire expression is a metaphor that describes the African woman and by extension, African culture. Firm fruit, ripe fruits, somber raptures of black wine. That's another metaphor. So Africa is a fruitful space that's blessed with abundance, okay, of food and other things to nurture the child. This is the Africa that the persona remembers or recalls. It's a beautiful place where there's no hunger because there are natural fruits to nurture the child. Somber ruptures of black wine again speaks to the richness of Africa in terms of natural resources. Mouth making lyrical my mouth. You also find repetition there in the repetition of the word mouth, and you also find alliteration there in the repetition of the bilabial nasal sound. In mouth, making, and mouth, right? Then the metaphors continue. Savannah stretching to the clear horizons speaks of the pastoral nature of Africa, the pastoral beauty of Africa, untouched beauty of Africa. Look at the visual imagery that those lines evoke, or that line evokes. Savannah stretching to clear horizons. It shows you the expansive land of Africa. And it's beautiful, it's pastoral in nature, it's untouched. It has not been modernized Africa. This is more or less pre-colonial Africa, depicted in its beauty, against the pollution that the colonial masters have brought to Africa in the name of urbanization and modernity. The prisoner is making us remember pastoral Africa. Africa as a countryside that was untouched by modernity, that was not destroyed by modernity. So Savannah stretching to clear horizons. If you see what you're reading with your mind's eyes, then you're able to appreciate the beauty of Africa. Savannah shuddering beneath the east wind's eager caresses. Again, it's a metaphor that shows the expansive land of Africa with fresh wind blowing through the land, making it fertile, making it beautiful. Okay? Savannah shuddering beneath the east wind's eager caresses. The land is depicted as a woman, and the wind is shown to be caressing the land. Okay? So there's a kind of love imagery being used there. Carved tum-tum. Taut tum-tum. Muttering under the conqueror's fingers. Now, tum-tum here is an African musical instrument, kind of drum. Of course, this makes me recall piano and drums, right? By Gabriel Okara. So the drum here represents Africa, an African culture. Okay? But unfortunately, it is now muttering under the conqueror's fingers. Meaning that African culture is under the grip of colonialism at the point that the poet is writing. That's what it means. That's how you're supposed to interpret the lines. Right? Because at the point the writer is writing, the poet is writing at the point of colonial encounter. And a lot is already happening to African culture. So African culture is now depicted as in the metaphor of a tam-tam, the drum, the talking drum, muttering under the conqueror's fingers. So muttering is not a sign of free speech. It shows that African culture at this point is caged. It's not allowed free expression. That's why it is muttering. What is ruling the land now is the colonial master's culture. African culture is underneath, choked, so cannot speak freely, so it mutes us only. That's how you're supposed to understand it. The conqueror there is the colonial masters. The solemn contralto voice, the spiritual song of the beloved. Even then, the person who finds a way to appreciate African culture in whatever form it exists now under colonial rule. Okay? I'm now on the first stanza. Naked woman, dark woman. All that no bread raffle. So the metaphors continue. So this poem is rich in metaphors. And metaphor is one of the major devices deployed by the poet to examine the theme of negritude in the poem. Because the African woman is described through metaphor, and by extension, African culture is depicted through the agency of metaphors. All that no bread raffles come all on the athlete's flank, on the flanks of the princes of Mali. Castle limbed in paradise. Castle limbed in paradise. Pearls are stars on the night of your skin. Still describing the beauty of Africa. Africa has a paradisiac space that is beautiful. The light of the mind, still metaphor, describing Africa. The glinting of red gold against your water skin. All these metaphors describe the beauty and the riches of Africa. Under the shadow of your hair, my care is lightened by the neighboring suns of your eyes. So the comparison of the woman's eyes to that of the sun shows how beautiful and glamorous it is. Naked woman, black woman, I sing your beauty that passes. Talking about the stranglehold that the colonial masters, the colonial culture has on African culture, the beauty that passes. The form that I fix in the eternal. So maybe this persona in Europe has seen an African woman and uses that image as a point of recollection of the African woman in Africa and by extension African culture. And so he's just looking at the woman as she passes and as he makes the comment in his poetry. That's another way to look at it. I think your beauty that passes. Your beauty that passes will also mean the fading African culture under the grip of colonial rule. Okay? The form that I fix in the eternal. African beauty and culture existing only as a memory. Because right now, at the point of writing, the whole place has been taken over by Western culture. So African culture, especially in the pre-colonial sense, only exists in the poet's imagination and can only be recalled or remembered. Before jealous fate turn you to ashes, to feed the roots of life. So the persona is recording this poem to posterity because he knows what the colonial masters are already doing to African culture by distorting them, distorting African history. So this poem will stand to counter whatever the colonial masters have done against African culture and tradition. That's why it says, before jealous fate, referring to the colonial project and its effect on African culture, turn you to ashes, destroy African culture. Before they could destroy African culture, let me write this down. All right? So it will serve as a memory, the one that comes, to read about how beautiful Africa was before all these things, all these calamities, tragedies occurred in Africa. Right. So that is the poem, Black Woman, which could be read as Negritude poetry by Senghor. And let us want to read Viaticum now by Birago Diop. Viaticum. So again, I'll read and then we do the explanation. Viaticum by Birago Diop. In one of the three jars, the three jars where on certain evenings return the tranquil souls, the breath of the ancestors who were men, the ancestors who were sages. Mother has dipped three fingers of her left hand, thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. I have dipped three fingers of my right hand, thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. With her three fingers red with blood, with dove's blood, with bull's blood, with goat's blood. Mother has touched me 3 times. She touched my forehead with her thumb, with her forefinger, my left breast, and my navel with her middle finger. I have held up my fingers red with blood, with dove's blood, with bull's blood, with goat's blood. I have held my 3 fingers to the winds, the north wind, the east wind, the south wind, and the west wind. And I have raised my 3 fingers towards the moon, towards the full moon, the full naked moon, when she was at the bottom of the biggest jar. I have thrust my 3 fingers into the sun which had grown cold. Mother said, "Go through the world, go in life. They will follow thy traces." Since then I go by the tracks and on the roads, beyond the seas and further still, beyond the sea and further still, beyond the sea and beyond the place beyond. When I come to the wicked men, the black-hearted men, when I come to the envious, the black-hearted men, before me advance the breath of the forefathers. So that is the point. So Brother Diop was a Senegalese poet, just like Senghor. He was born in 1906. He died in 1989. Was a poet and a storyteller. He was educated in Senegal and in Paris, France. So most of them went to France and to become Frenchmen. One of his poems is Viaticum. Now, before we study the poem, we need to state that Viaticum has a religious meaning. Its meaning is religious because it refers to the Eucharist given to a person who is dying or in danger of death. Viaticum is the Eucharist, Eucharist, given to a person who is dying or one in danger of death. It also refers to the religious ceremony to prepare someone for a journey or a prayer said before someone goes on a journey. So what I see here is an appropriation. It's an appropriation of the Christian religious culture by the poets, but to use to talk about African culture, which is the same thing that our keyboard does. Okay? It takes this idea from the Christian religion, but uses it to discuss African religious culture, African traditional religion. That is what we call appropriation in literature. So when you read this poem, you notice that the persona is about to undertake a journey, a long journey from home. And the poem is mostly about all that goes into preparing the persona to leave home. Because even in the Christian religion, when someone wants to undertake a journey, the person goes to the priest to prepare for him and prepare him so that the journey will be successful, so that he will be protected against evil spirits, against dangers and death. But the term Viaticum is used here, taken from African religious culture, or African religion, but used to talk about traditional African religious practices of preparing a child for a long journey, or individual for a long journey. And I said that is a mark of appropriation. So we are going to read the poem as a poem of negritude, as negritude poetry, meaning that it has to celebrate blackness and African culture. And when we read the poem, you need to pay attention to see those indices in the poem that indicate or that are indicative of a celebration of African culture. So in this case, the person has been prepared in the African traditional way, rooted in African traditional religion, which the colonial masters came and called paganism, but which the Negritude writers now celebrate as a true religion. All right? Because the colonial masters came and said, you don't have religion. What you are practicing is a man-made God. All right? You are worshiping man-made gods. Okay? And then they sing, never worship. Right? So, but the truth is, no religion is superior to the other religion. So as much as you respect the European religion, the Europeans should also respect African religion. All right? So you can only convert someone into your religion when you are convinced them, when you are able to convince them of the efficacy of your own religion. Right? And not to look down on that person's religion. So that is what is happening here. It's the same thing that Okibo is doing in Negritude. All right? So, in one of the three jobs, what I want you to understand is the significance, note the significance of number 3 in this poem, because the spiritual number that is very important in African traditional culture, even across religions, not even in African religious culture. All right? Number three, very important. So beginning from the first line, in one of the three jobs, all right? The three jobs where on certain evenings return the tranquil soul. Tranquil soul refers to the ancestors. Because African traditional religion is mostly the worship of ancestors. The patriarchs who have passed away and now protect the land and are now appeased by the living so that they can guard and do good by the living. So they are the ones being called tranquil souls. Let's take note of that in the point. Referring to ancestors, African traditional religion is mostly the worshipping of the ancestors. Okay? So ancestor worship is one of the practices of African traditional religion. It's not that. Tranquil souls, the breaths of the ancestors. The ancestors who were men. By men here we mean not the effeminate men that are produced in post-colonial African spaces, but real men who were warriors, who were great. Right? That's what they mean there by that. Genuine human beings, strong and powerful. The ancestors who were men, the ancestors who were sages. Sages means a person, an old person, who is blessed with wisdom. So, meaning that Africans were not intellectually inferior to Europeans, as the Europeans wanted the world to believe. Our ancestors were sages. They were wise people. And as I said, the Europeans came to Africa to learn from our sages. Mother has dipped 3 fingers. Mother has dipped 3 fingers. 3 fingers of her left hand. Very significant, spiritually significant. Thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. I have dipped 3 fingers. 3 fingers of my right hand. Thumb, forefinger, and middle finger. With her 3 fingers red with blood. Blood, there is an instance of visual imagery because you can see it, right? And it represents sacrifice in the traditional African religion. Traditional African religion believes in sacrifice. Okay? With the 3 fingers red with blood. With dove's blood. The sacrifice of animal is part of African traditional religion. Alright? So when the colonial masters looked down on the African traditional religious practices, you also have to about sacrificing goats and other animals. We also have to remind them that in the Old Testament, there were also animal sacrifice, and it's in the Bible, right?
Yes.
With dove's blood,
Yes.
with bull's blood, with goat's blood. So, African traditional religion is known for sacrifice of animals, including chicken, right? Sacrifice chicken, right? Good. Mother has touched me 3 times. Again, it's not the number 3. It's spiritually significant in African traditional religion. Mother has touched me 3 times. This poem can be read as a ritual. Can be read as what? Ritual. Right? Can be read as ritual, which is part of African oral tradition. So the ritual is the preparation of the persona to undergo a journey, a long journey that will take him away from home, so that he will be protected against evil spirits, evil eyes, and evil men. Right? and so that he will return home safely. Mother has touched me 3 times. She has touched my forehead with a thumb, with a forefinger, and she has touched my forehead with a thumb, with a forefinger, my left breast, head. Okay? All those parts of the body are significant. Head to protect him and to keep his sanity, heart to keep him alive, left breast to keep him alive, and my navel to make him remember his home, where he comes from. That's just my interpretation. It could be more than that, it could be other things. I have held out my fingers red with blood, with duck's blood, with the bull's blood, with goat's blood. I have held my 3 fingers to the winds. That means the entire universe is informed about the young man's journey, so that wherever he is, he will be protected. The elements of nature will protect him. Okay? The universe itself will protect him. The north wind, the east wind, the south wind, and the west wind. Meaning that wherever he goes, wherever he goes, whether he goes north, the protection is there. He goes south, the protection is there. He goes east, the protection is there. Wherever he goes in the 4 winds, the protection is quite significant. I have held my 3 fingers to the winds, the north wind, the east wind, the south wind, and the west wind. I have raised my 3 fingers towards the moon. Even the moon is informed about the person's journey, so that the power of the moon will also act as protection towards the full moon, the full naked moon. When she was at the bottom of the biggest jar, I have thrust my 3 fingers into the sand, which has grown cold. The earth is also informed. The earth is also embraced and notified and appealed to concerning the person's journey. So there's no way that he will not have protection. His protection is complete and total, because he's protected by the wind, he's protected by the elements, he's protected by the earth. So nothing can harm him. Amen, Senghor.
Amen.
Mother said, after all these rituals were done, Mother said, so words are also important. Words are also important. So Mother said, the mother speaks now. Remember how powerful the words of the mother is. Go through the world. Go in life. They will follow thy traces. So the words of the mother will act as protection for the child wherever he goes. He says, go in life. That means he will not die. He will not die throughout the journey. Nothing will happen to him. I will threaten his life. Okay? All the elements that have been consulted will follow the child and protect the child wherever they go. All right? So the Christians also do the same thing when they want to go on a journey. They go to the priest and kneel down, that the priest will pray for them, that the journey will be safe, will be secure. So there's no difference. Whether you choose to do it in the African way, or whether you want to do it in the different way. I've seen that it seems that the African way is more efficacious, right? Good. So since then, I go by the tracks. Tracks means whenever he takes train, right? Which is a modern transportation system brought by the Europeans. Okay? It might even mean that he's no longer in Africa. Go by the tracks, okay? And on the roads, when he uses the car, and he's protected. He's on the train, he's protected. When he's on the road, he's protected. Beyond the seas and further still, that means he's outside Africa right now. But the protection is still there. The words of the mother, the ritual that was done, to protect this child. All right? Beyond the sea and further still. This person has traveled the whole world, but the protection is still effective. Right? And when I come to the wicked men, that people don't like progress, right? Okay? They call wicked men. They don't like people to progress in life. So that's why I said when I come to the wicked men, the black-hearted men, okay? Black-hearted men, black is used in the negative sense. Maybe it refers to witches and wizards, all right? I don't want you to succeed in school, all right? I don't want you to read. You read one thing and it evaporates, right? When I come to envious men, men of envy, those who envy the personal success in life, the black-hearted men, before me advance the breaths of the forefathers. So the ancestors are protecting this persona wherever it goes in life because the ancestors were consulted before the persona left home on this epic journey. Okay? So this poem indirectly celebrates African traditional culture by enacting the ritual performance of preparing a child for a long journey. Okay? And so the images evoked in the poem are drawn from African traditional religion. And because it celebrates African culture, this poem passes or qualifies as Negritude poetry. Okay, so this is where we end our class for today. Remember, we'll meet again at 2 to take survey of English literature.